In this presentation, you will learn about marginalization and social exclusion with reference to sexuality. Marginalization is at the core of exclusion from leading a fulfilling and full social life at all levels. People who are marginalized have relatively little control over their lives and the resources available to them. They may become stigmatized and are often at the receiving end of negative public attitudes. With time, they develop low self-esteem and may become isolated. Social policies and practices may mean they have relatively limited access to valued social resources such as education and health services, housing, income, leisure, activities, and work. The impact of marginalization in terms of social exclusion are similar, whatever the origins and processes of marginalization, irrespective of whether these are to be located in social attitudes or social circumstances. LGBTQ individuals may experience racism, sexism, poverty, or other factors alongside homophobia and transphobia that negatively impact their mental health. This marginalization often excludes LGBT people from many support structures, often including their own families, leaving them with little access to services many others take for granted, such as medical care, justice and legal services, and education. Marginalization and bias around sexual orientation and gender identity and expression regularly prevent LGBTQIA people from accessing fundamental public services such as healthcare, housing, and contribute to significant health disparities. Marginalization of LGBT people often starts with the family into which they were born. The exclusion and discrimination have major impacts on the lives of lesbian, gay, and transgender persons. This has resulted in the following: dropping out of school earlier, leaving home and family, unable to find regular jobs, have less options than others, being ignored in the community and isolated, non-accessibility to various services, mobility, move to other areas such as the city and urban areas, lack family support, social support, rejection from religion, especially Muslim and Christian fundamentalist sects, attempt suicide, forceful marriage with opposite sex, and then divorce. Impact of family reactions on LGBT children. In the past, very few adolescents came out to their families or told others they were gay. Most lesbians, gay men, and bisexuals waited until they were adults to talk about their LGBT identity with others. Fear of rejection and serious negative reactions kept many LGBT adults from openly sharing their lives. More recently, the internet, school diversity clubs, and LGBT youth groups have helped gay and transgender youth find accurate information, guidance, and support. With greater access to resources, more LGBT youth are coming out or sharing their gay or transgender identity with friends, family, and other adults during adolescence. Families and caregivers have a major impact on their LGBT children's risk and well-being. Lack of communication and misunderstanding between parents and their LGBT children gives rise to family conflict. These problems with communication and lack of understanding about sexual orientation and gender identity can lead to fighting and family disruption that can result in an LGBT adolescent being removed from or forced out of the house. Many LGBT youth are placed in foster care or end up in juvenile detention or on the streets because of family conflict related to their LGBT identity. These factors increase their risk for abuse and for serious health and mental health problems. LGBT youth and those who question their identity feel like they have to hide who they are to avoid being rejected. Many hide so that they won't hurt their parents and other family members who believe that being gay is wrong or sinful. It increases risky behavior such as risk for HIV or substance abuse. It also affects their ability to plan for the future, including their ability to have career or vocational plans. Problems of homelessness. Homelessness include a lack of housing and services that meet their specific needs. Family housing in the shelter system across the country is not available for homeless same-sex couples. Transgender people are not allowed to choose with which gender they are more comfortable living in the shelter system. Abuse and harassment of LGBT homeless people is inevitable. Most domestic violence shelters do not accept gay men or transgender people. Homeless LGBT youth are without economic support, often engage in drug use and risky sexual behaviors, and often develop mental health disorders. Homeless LGBT youth miss out on education and social support during critical formative years. More than half of homeless LGBT youth report experiencing discrimination from peers. Homophobia. Homophobia is generally defined as hostility towards or fear of gay people, but can also refer to stigma arising from social ideologies about homosexuality. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people are more likely to experience intolerance, discrimination, harassment, and the threat of violence due to their sexual orientation than those that identify themselves as heterosexual. This is due to homophobia. Some of the factors that may reinforce homophobia on a larger scale are moral, religious, and political beliefs of a dominant group. Living in a homophobic environment forces many LGBT people to conceal their sexuality for fear of the negative reactions and consequences of coming out. Negative feelings or attitudes towards non-heterosexual behavior, identity, relationships, and community can lead to homophobic behavior, and this is the root of discrimination experienced by many lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. Homophobia manifests itself in different forms. For example, homophobic jokes, physical attacks, discrimination in the workplace, and negative media representation. For people who have been brought up to believe that homosexuality is wrong, the realization that they might be gay can cause feelings of shame and self-loathing, leading to low self-esteem. LGBT people who make the decision to declare their sexual orientation may face prejudice and discrimination from their family, friends, and also the wider society. Homophobia can cause extreme harm and disruption to people's lives. Harassment of LGBT students in schools. LGBT students face harassment in schools. Being a teenager is tough enough without fearing harassment in a place where you're supposed to feel safe. All over the country, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender students get harassed every day. Students who may be even just perceived as LGBT also get harassed. Too many LGBT students find it hard to speak up about harassment because it is so embedded in our culture. LGBT harassment is one of the last forms of harassment that is still allowed in popular culture. Psychological distress. LGBT people face considerable levels of stigmatization, discrimination, and harassment in their daily lives. However, a significant number of LGBT people, most particularly younger LGBT people, have to cope with stigmatization, discrimination, and harassment without any support. It has a negative impact on their mental health, leading to significant levels of psychological distress, self-harm, and suicidality. LGBT teenagers can be particularly isolated given that many will be exploring their sexual orientation or gender identity without any support. At this time of negotiating their journey to adulthood, a critical period of social and emotional development, they can be particularly vulnerable. It is often more difficult for LGBT people to be out in rural areas. Comparatively, cities are more conducive to allowing LGBT people to select which areas of their life they wish to be out in. Men and women are more likely to experience depression and anxiety than are their heterosexual counterparts. These emotions might include intense sadness, anxiety, loneliness, discomfort in social situations, and feeling overwhelmed. It's not because of their gender identity alone. It's because in a patriarchal society, being gender variant causes a lot of distress. So much distress, in fact, that it can be described by the diagnosis of a mental disorder. A number of factors may contribute to this, from living in an often homophobic society to facing family rejection to being closeted into some or all aspects of life. Mental disorders are not symptoms of sexual orientation, but rather they are symptoms of discrimination and fear of discrimination. Most likely due to violence, social rejection and isolation, the LGBT community experiences higher rates of anxiety, mood and substance use disorders, and suicidal thoughts among people ages 15 to 54. Possibly due to rejection from both gay and straight communities, bisexual women have been found to have significantly poorer mental health than either lesbians or heterosexual women. Mayock et al., in a large-scale Irish study, report that young LGBT people as a whole are more vulnerable to psychological distress. They report that over 60% of respondents directly attribute stress and depression to their non-heterosexual identity. There is a large body of evidence which supports the claim that poor emotional health can be as a result of homophobic attitudes and heterosexism in society, leading to lowered self-esteem and confidence and increased stress, particularly for young gay women. Poor economic condition and discrimination in the workplace. In addition to homophobia, lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender people confront racism and poverty on a daily basis. Discrimination of LGBT persons in the workplace is a significant factor in the differences of socio-economic status for LGBT persons. Gay and transgender individuals suffer from socio-economic inequalities in large part due to pervasive discrimination in the workplace. Organizations and individual therapists are not always LGBT friendly, and some therapists may not even recognize their own heterosexism. Challenges faced by LGBT elders. Lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender face a number of particular concerns as they age. They often do not access adequate health care, affordable housing or other social services that they need due to institutionalized heterosexism. Most LGBT elders do not avail themselves of services on which other seniors thrive. Many retreat back into the closet, reinforcing isolation. Many LGBT elders experience social isolation and ageism within the LGBT community itself. These issues, often compounded by racism and other kinds of discrimination, demand the attention of policymakers, service providers, and activists working on behalf of and with the elderly. As LGBT people grow older, they enter a world of services that may not be familiar with LGBT people. A number of problems faced by LGBT elders also stem from the fact that they often do not have the same family support systems as heterosexual people. Little is known about LGBT elders because of the widespread failure of governmental and academic researchers to include questions about sexual orientation and gender identity in their studies of the aged. Legal and policy frameworks which have traditionally excluded LGBT people engender social and economic consequences which deny LGBT elders access to financial resources and community support networks. The need to make broad assumptions about the size of the LGBT elderly population underscores one of the major problems in understanding the needs of this population. LGBT elders are not only underserved, they are also understudied. Thank you for watching the presentation. Do like, subscribe, share and leave your comments about this presentation or any other topic you would like to learn more about.